I don't have a whole lot more to say. Bill gave me a speech. Before I get started, I'd like to recognize those Cincinnatians who happen to be in the room. I know we have some here at the table. Will you please stand a few minutes and I guess just here at this table. Thank you for being here. This morning I was in the dental chair and the phone rang. I thought I'd turn my phone off, and it was Charlie to remind me that I had a speech to give today, so thank you, Charlie. Before I get started, I want to preface a little bit of my remarks about the Revolutionary War, which will tie into the Society of Cincinnati. But as you know, during that time in the 1760s, the colonies were under a lot of duress, primarily two things: the French and Indian War, which is very, very expensive to England, and then finally taxation without representation. We had the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, and other acts. Basically, the colonists just got fed up and said enough is enough. We want to be loyal to England, but we want to be like the folks who live in England, the British. Well, we know that didn't happen. And North Carolina is pretty famous for two things: first in victory and first in independence. The first in independence took place in Halifax, North Carolina, called the Halifax Resolves. And then the Battle of Moore's Creek was the first victory, not by the Continental Army, but by the members of the local militia who were fighting some of the loyalists coming out of Fayetteville, trying to meet up with Cornwallis in Wilmington. They met in Pender County at a little town called Curry. So we won that battle. That kind of got things started. And finally we had Concord and we had Lexington, the shot we heard around the world. We've heard about that. And then for 8 long years, the war raged on. Cornwallis ravaged the South. South Carolina was pretty much under British control. North Carolina was holding its own. We had the Battle of Kings Mountain. We had the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. And were two of the probably the more recognizable and famous battles that pretty much held Cornwallis back a little bit. Even though some of those battles were draws, we won one, lost one. Probably remember Cowpens in South Carolina and some others. Finally, Cornwallis went on to Yorktown, where he was defeated thanks to the help of Lafayette and the French Navy. He was cut off at Yorktown, surrounded by the patriots, and surrendered, and the battle was pretty much over. Well, after that, a lot of the officers of the Revolution decided to get together and meet. They met in a little town called Fish Hill, New York, about 50 miles north of New York City, to talk about this fraternity of great men, great leaders. And what do we do now? How do we keep in touch with each other? Kind of like Rotary. It's kind of like a fraternity. So Henry Knox and Alexander Hamilton got together with the blessing of George Washington, who, by the way, was the first president of the General Society of Cincinnati, to talk about an organization. They decided to call this organization the Society of Cincinnati, named after Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus, who in the 5th century BC in Rome was pulled from the farm, dropped his plow, became a dictator of the Roman Council in Rome. And after they won the battle, he went back to plowing the fields. So he basically gave up everything: his family, his friends, his job, and went to fight for a noble cause, which was to save the Republic of Rome at that time. So they thought it would be a great idea, some of our founding fathers of the American Revolution, to name this society after this gentleman called Cincinnatus. And they did. So thus became the Society of Cincinnati. By the way, the town in Cincinnati wasn't named after the town, it was reversed. Cincinnati was found by members of the Cincinnati, and thus they gave that name. A lot of folks after the war moved west. Ohio became a state, and they settled in that region and named it after the organization, the Society of Cincinnati. So originally the 13 colonies after the war, they each had a state society for the Society of Cincinnati, plus France. So you have 13 societies, state societies, plus France equal 14 constituents of the General Society. And they came up with the institution came up with 4 principles of the Cincinnati. One was to preserve the right and liberties for free man, promote the national honor of the Union, preserve the bond of friendship, pretty much like a fraternity, and assist in families of need. These same principles have pretty much gone down generation after generation of other members of the Cincinnati. The membership basically at that time were members of the officers who fought on the Continental line, not the militia, but the Continental line, both the Army and Navy and the French Army and Navy, and direct descendants of those who fought in the war. Usually at that time it was a first son. That has now changed. So the membership now can be anybody who has a direct line to an officer who fought on the Continental line during the Revolution. Also, the membership at that time was those who served 3 years in the American Revolution, those who died during the war, and those who served at the closing of the war. There were rules and eligibilities, and these rules and eligibilities have pretty much been the same over the last several hundred years. Each state society, though, can now make their own rules, and some societies have different rules, but they're pretty much along the same guidelines. The mission now of the society is basically to promote public interest in the American Revolution. Our headquarters is located in Washington, D.C. on Massachusetts Avenue. In the 1930s, Lars Anderson, who was a diplomat, willed his house, which is an embassy in Washington, to the society. So that is where we have our fall meeting, our annual meeting is in Washington, also where the other state societies also meet. It's a beautiful house. There are about 14 rooms. Each state society has one room, and when you go to Washington, you can stay in any one of those rooms. And it's been recognized as probably the second most beautiful house in Washington other than the White House. It's near DuPont Circle, so if you're ever in Washington, do drop by. They have a wonderful museum there. Part of our mission, they have artifacts. We also have pamphlets, CDs, exhibitions. There's a wonderful museum, as I mentioned. And now we've formed a relationship with the Civil War Trust to help to preserve American Revolution battlefields. Getting a little bit back, I mentioned the Anderson House, where we have our national meetings. We are in the State Society, as Bill mentioned, which is headquartered here in Raleigh. Our headquarters is a little house next to the Red Dragon, if you know where that is, on Fairview Road. That is our headquarters here in North Carolina. We have about 480 members. I would say probably 70 of them reside in Raleigh. They live in about 26 states and about 3 or 4 countries. Obviously, some of those who live far away usually don't make a meeting, but they do stay involved. We get together twice a year, one time in Washington, as I mentioned, at the Anderson House, and once somewhere in North Carolina. This past year we met here in Raleigh, had a reception at the Governor's Mansion, had a formal dinner that night, had our meeting in the Capitol Rotunda building. Last year we met in Pinehurst, we met in Wilmington, different places, usually areas that have Revolutionary War significance. The signet that we wear, we have a rosette that I'm wearing today. It's a Cincinnati Rosette. And we also, the colors that you can see from the tie that I've worn today is kind of a light blue and white. The light blue represents the friendship we share with France, the white, our country, United States. There's also an eagle, and the eagle is something that's worn on our formal affairs that we have in Washington. You're welcome to see this after the meeting, but we wear this around our neck if we're wearing formal attire, or in a lapel if we're just wearing a black tie. That eagle is really very significant because George Washington, after he became the first President General, was presented an eagle by Lafayette, President of France. And that eagle was commissioned as part of the Society of Cincinnati as an insignia for members to wear. Actually, Washington wore 3 eagles, but the most important eagle was an eagle that had diamonds encrusted around it. And so every President General has worn this eagle ever since Washington was President General. It's been passed down every 3 years. Since the 50s. Before that, each member was served for a lifetime membership as President General. I'm very proud that my father was President General of the General Society of Cincinnati in 1971 to 1974, and actually wore General Washington's eagle. I remember the days when we were at the Anderson House. I was up there at the meeting because I got sworn in when I was 18, and he was being sworn in as Vice President General. And he was so afraid he was going to lose that eagle, so he had it pinned to his pillow. And my mother was terrified because he had a pistol underneath the pillow because he wanted to be the first President General to lose the eagle. But we knew that didn't happen. But on the eagle itself, on the front side of it, is representing Cincinnatus, who is basically accepting the power from Rome. I think it's a sword or a spear or something. And then on the back is his plow, where he returned back to the country life of being a common man. And that's some of the same principles we have today, is we give up a lot to basically preserve the institution of the Union for which we were founded. Getting back to the Eagle, Lafayette, or L'Enfant, who actually was one of the architects of Washington, was actually one who was commissioned to go to France and basically design the Eagle and come back with the Eagle. And North Carolina has its own Eagle. We had one that was commissioned in the early 1900s, but during a fire, that Eagle was actually destroyed, at least the blueprint of the Eagle. But one of our members of society was able to find some of the old blueprints of the Eagle, and since it manufactured the Eagle, so new members now can purchase an Eagle, which is really significant for membership. Getting very quickly, I know we're kind of short on time because I want to leave a few minutes for questions and answers, but I want to talk a little bit about the North Carolina Society itself. It was founded in October of 1783 at the James Hogg House, H-O-G-G, in Hillsborough, North Carolina. He was a Scottish merchant, had a little house there. It has since been torn down, actually burned down. And he was offered his house for members of the Continental Army after the war in 1783 to assemble and form the North Carolina chapter of the Cincinnati. Washington, when he became president, challenged each of the 13 colonies, now 13 states, then 13 states, to form their own state society, as they did, along with France. Some of the original members moved west in the 1800s, so basically during the 1800s, the Society of Cincinnati basically dissolved the North Carolina chapter because everybody was moving west. Some of the original members had died off. A lot of the hereditary members really didn't want to get involved, so for about 100 years we really didn't have much of a state society. Many of the new states were being formed in the Midwest, like Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, and that's where many of our members moved to. At that time, we had a little about 200 members, and it shrunk all the way to 6 members. And when it got started again back in 1900, we actually had about 200 members. Today, we have about 460 members, and trying to get it to grow. The problem we have is with membership, you have to have a direct right to an officer who served in the Continental line. It can be the first son or the second son. And a lot of the members we do have, some of the members we have now don't have a lot of interest in society, so I hate to say it this way, but many times they might tie up a right that someone else would like to have and serve. So we're trying, that's one of our challenges now, is to have more of an outreach program to encourage our members to be active, both financially and also involving in our meetings and our outreach to discuss the revolution and keep that in the forefront of all of our citizens. We had our first triennial meeting in Asheville in 1917. And triennial meetings are held every 3 years where all the 13 societies get together along with France. We meet in some pretty neat places. Next year we're meeting in Williamsburg, Yorktown, Pass Society. We met in Trenton, New Jersey, where the battle was fought. Prior to that, we met in New Haven, Connecticut at Yale. We do have a hereditary membership. North Carolina probably has 4 or 5. Don, maybe more than that. I'm not sure, but some of the state societies have more. So a lot of the presidents of the United States have hereditary membership. I know Ronald Reagan did, Herbert Hoover, some others had membership. And they don't have voting privileges, but they can come to the meetings and be involved that way. Our headquarters was purchased in 2007, as I mentioned. It's on Hillsborough Road. If you have a chance to drop by, it's open on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We have a little bit of a museum there. We have an administrative assistant. We have some artifacts, some old books, some old journals, but the big museum is in Washington, which is open to the public 5 days a week. And it's one of the best learning centers of the American Revolution anywhere in the country. And we have scholars, individuals working on the PhDs will come there and spend days looking at some of the original artifacts of the American Revolution. Let's see here. In closing, if you'd like to find out more about the Society of Cincinnati, not only the North Carolina Society, but the General Society, we do have a website. It's ncsocietycincinnati.org. It's something we're trying to keep updated as best we can, but there's a lot of information on there. Please go and visit if you like. And this time I'd like to kind of open it up to questions if any of y'all have any questions about the society itself or any other questions you might have.
Is the organization building an office here in Raleigh?
We've purchased 2 lots in downtown Raleigh on Blunt Street. Right now it's an investment opportunity for us. But I think our long-range plans might be to build a headquarters, a bigger space where we can have more socials, a better museum, a place to store a lot of our artifacts and journals. But that question is yes. Right now, the space we're in is very, very small. We have a hard time holding meetings there, so we're meeting outside of the building. So it's evolving, but hopefully one day we'll have a capital campaign will be able to do that. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
Your list of members would be a great asset to people who are doing genealogy, like
Right.
to trace back. Do you have access to that online where you can trace your members all the way back?
Not online. You really have to go through a genealogist,
Okay.
and there's a fee for that the society charges.
Okay.
But we do have our own little, what do you call it, Don, directory or the blue book?
Yeah.
The blue book, a roster that has prepositists that are available from, people, officers who fought in the Revolution that may not have, an ancestor has claimed that right. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you explain the first son, second son thing that you were talking
Only
about?
back then, not anymore.
Okay.
That is dissolved, and it
Okay.
doesn't have to be a son anymore. We have members who never married, so they may give it to a nephew or a first cousin.
Right.
Like my ancestor was Colonel Joseph Hawkins, who lived in Warrenton, and he had three other brothers. And I have one cousin who has a right to him, and then there are two other individuals who have rights to him, like Surrey and Don and others, Holmes. They have all ancestors who served in the North Carolina Continental line with various ancestors. South Carolina, they're such a small society. Two brothers, three brothers may have the same ancestor and have three different memberships. North Carolina chose not to go that way. We have a rule of 1854, just to bore you a little bit more, that now allows members to join the society whose original ancestors did not sign on right after the war, they signed on later. So Massachusetts has held that forever, and they just changed that. As a result, their membership has really shrunk. They're a very small society. So our challenge is get younger members, like any club, like any fraternity, and Don?
Can I add this? 'Cause
Yeah.
Don's heavily involved in it as well.
Don is on the national level as our legal counsel, one of them.
Kirk is asking this question, that while the society was originally formed by the officers in the Continental line, there were a number of members of the militia in the different states who were members of officers in the militia, but they served under Continental command. And they received a pension from the United States government after the American Revolution.
1 month's pay.
Yeah, and you can, join the Society of Cincinnati if your ancestor fought with the militia. And that's if they served under Continental command. Part of the issue there was that, at the time of the American Revolution, we had the system of primogeniture, where the oldest son would inherit the farm or the land and everything. And so many times, the first son would be an officer in the militia so he could stay close to home to mind the farm. The second and third sons would go into the Continental line because they weren't going to get the farm. And they spent 8 years wandering up and down the coast, fighting for the cause. And so some of those first sons qualified just as well.
Yes.
So I'm assuming you have people come to you who are interested in becoming a member, and before they can do that, they pay this fee to have their genealogy done to...
That's correct. They receive an application from us.
Yeah.
We get many, many requests each year, and most of them do not qualify because they're not using a genealogist. They just feel like they have a right that is available. So we have a registrar who goes through those hundreds of applications, probably every 3 or 4 years.
I'm sure this is a silly question, but I'm just curious, what percentage of people who actually do go perform the genealogy, is it a very small number?
Probably a high percentage, because I would think people who are willing to spend money for a genealogist pretty much have an idea that they do qualify.
Okay.
It's usually the ones who don't invest, the ones who usually don't qualify. And we have names of genealogists. One, I think, is at NC State that we've used in the past. I think we have 3 total, 2 or 3. Yeah.
So what is the current involvement of anybody from France in this fraternity now?
We get together, they have about, I'm trying to think how many members they have, several hundred. And at the triennials every 3 years, they come over. And so they're involved that way. And
Who is it that comes?
what's that?
What individuals?
They have what they call a standing committee like we have. It's delegates to the convention. So we have X number of delegates that come to the convention. So they'll send maybe 15 people over. We met at Orton Plantation about 8-9 years ago at a triennial that North Carolina actually put on. We've had them barbecue, corn on the cob, hush puppies. They had a ball. And they speak English. And then when we go over there, they usually have these beautiful chateaus, and you can only imagine what it's like for them to entertain us. We have a French scholar exchange program, pretty much like what y'all, the Rotaries had and still do. So a French scholar will come over here, usually 17, 18-year-olds, it could be a female or a boy, and they spend time with members of the Cincinnati all over the country. I don't know if you know Chris Webster. He grew up in Raleigh. He lives in Santa Fe, so he stays with Chris for 3 days. He'll go to Texas. He'll go to Washington, Philadelphia. So he's entertained royally for 5 weeks. Then he goes back and tells the story. And as well as we send one of our children or someone else's child over to France, the same thing. It's that bond that we want to keep together. You know, it's because if it wasn't for the French, I don't think we would have won the war. You know, they came in with their navy and pretty much, demoralized Cornwallis. He had to give up. He was trapped. And that bond still, the only ribbon that King Louis XVI allowed members to wear was a Cincinnati ribbon for a foreign decoration, because they were very strict on the type of ribbons their soldiers could wear, mainly just French ribbons. This was the only ribbon that they were allowed to wear. So, yeah.
After 9/11, the French received a lot of criticism from the United States Congress. How did the society react to that criticism?
We kind of stay out of politics. I mean, we're all what we call pretty much your 4 rules. We're pretty much friends within the society. You know, we all have our personal opinions about that, but we're very close, at least with the society members. The government is different, as you can probably know, but these, we really don't spend enough time to really talk about politics. We really don't talk a lot about politics with our own society. I mean, it's all walks of life, Many of the members of society served in the U.S. Congress. They served in the Senate, presidents. I mean, we're Democrats, Republicans, Independents. It really, we're across the board, hereditary members and also honorary members. I mean, I don't know how many presidents that are honorary members, but quite a few astronauts. It's the oldest, as Bill mentioned, the oldest hereditary historic society in the country. And we've had some criticism way back. Ben Franklin was one of them who criticized us as an elitist group, a noble group, nobility, privilege, pretty much like England was that we broke away from. So it was those who who came after Washington, it took about 10 years to pretty much ease that out, ease it over, and then Franklin pretty much came on board there toward the end. Alexander Hamilton was the second president. Unfortunately, he was shot by Aaron Burr. And then Senator Pinkley out of South Carolina, and then his brother was third and fourth presidents. And they served for a lifetime back then. Of course, Hamilton didn't serve very long because he was shot in a duel. But for the last, I think, since 1950 thereabouts, the president generals now serve every 3 years. And their new ones are appointed at the triennial, at our annual convention that's held every 3 years. It's not called a convention, it's called a triennial.
Was Colonel Burr a member as well, I assume?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
you have a dueling policy?
Well, we there were quite a few of those back then who were members just because they fought in the war. I mean, that's, yeah.
Since it's been opened up to membership, do you have
Any what?
any women?
Any women? No, if there were women who fought in the American Revolution back then, we would have women members. But women played a big role in the American Revolution, but obviously there are no women members. Yeah.
You mentioned honorary members. What are the requirements to be an honorary?
That's a good question. Each state society, I think, has its own definition, what is an honorary member. I mean, we have probably the fewest honorary members. Museum of History, Ken Howard. Ken Howard, the Museum of History here in Raleigh, just became an honorary member, one of our few honorary members at our last meeting in Raleigh this past spring. We just look for those who have interest in history, interest in the American Revolution, for one. Others could be retired generals who fought recently in a war, one of the Middle East wars, or it could be a scientist, it could be a professor who had an interest. Those names, are presented to the standing committee and they're voted upon. Usually it's an unanimous vote. We need to do probably a better job of bringing in more honorary members. They don't have a vote. They do pay, they do contribute. They do, give their time and their expertise. Yes?
Tony, what's the history of the little bitty building beside the Red Dragon? And do they have bar call?
Okay, good question. The little building, I understand some developers, Willie York, I think, once had an office there from Raleigh. And I think the church, when the Anglican church downtown early on, had an office there, a church office. It's been a gift shop, I know that. It's been a lot of different things. But it looks colonial. That's the reason we liked it, the roof and everything. We have the biggest fig tree in Raleigh. So if anybody wants any figs in August, you won't have to fight our neighbor off to come by and pick them, but you're welcome to them. But I think one more question. Yeah.
Governor, remember?
The governor?
Yes.
No, he's not a member. We've had past governors who are honorary members. I'm not trying to think who the last governor was. It's been a while. Again, we don't have that many honorary members, so anyhow, thank y'all very much. I know time is short, but appreciate it.